What happened to private military company Wagner? Where are its fighters? Is Evgeny Prigozhin still alive? These and many other similar questions are, I would say, among the ones I receive the most across all my social media. So, without further delay, I'm going to tell you what's currently happening with this private military company. In the last few years of the existence of the Russian Federation, it has indeed played a huge role in absolutely every sense and aspect. The question has been posed to me from every angle and, well, countless times. The Wagner private military company, as such, at this moment, has officially ceased to exist. I don't want to beat around the bush too much, but I will explain it in as much detail as current events allow me. And little by little, also in the future episodes of the channel, maybe we will go into more detail as we tell the story. The Wagner private military company, and especially Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was at the head, did an absolutely tremendous job in Africa. They did an impressive job in Donbass. In Donbass, moreover, the work of the Wagner private military company actually began in a very special way. It culminated with the capture of the town of Artyomovsk. Now the town of Artyomovsk is under the control of the Russian Federation. Previously, it was the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, and there are things I might tell you about someday. In the meantime, let's focus on the fate of the Wagner Group. Strictly speaking, you'll see on June 24th, 2023. If I'm not mistaken, this absolutely fateful coup attempt by the private military company took place. Wagner against the authorities of the Russian Federation and Yevgeny Prigozhin. At first, the ones they were supposedly acting against were the top officials of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. But ultimately, the one they were acting against was the most important power in the country, against Vladimir Putin. And here, many of us agree that Prigozhin definitely made a mistake. The theory that perhaps it was a clever plan officially agreed upon between Putin and Prigozhin to achieve some sort of objectives. But honestly now, at this very moment, this theory has fewer and fewer reasons to exist. Evgeny Prigozhin, I think it was on August 23rd of the same year, well, he suffered a plane crash, but most likely he was eliminated by the very powers of the Russian Federation. Not necessarily, and certainly not by Vladimir Putin himself. But what he did, in some way, was something that simply could not be allowed. And in Russia, where? For those who don't know, I'll tell it here as well, in a somewhat summarized way. Those who ultimately govern are the so-called siloviki and siloviki. That is, the law enforcement forces, the state security forces, and agencies. These men, whether from the Federal Security Service or other services within the country, are the ones who reach agreements and establish what is considered the state of security and balance within the country. And therefore, the fact of a sudden departure, for example, of Vladimir Putin from power. His departure from Russian power would not really represent a tragedy, much less a catastrophe, because the Siloviki would most likely already have something prepared. Not only Putin's own departure, but also the arrival of the person who will end up replacing him. And of course, in this case, the attack against what were the pillars of the state of the Russian Federation was absolutely unparalleled. Furthermore, it happened at a critical moment when the whole country was fighting, when the army, for the most part, was focused on the special military operation. The Wagner private military company crossed the lines of what was the territory of the special military operation and headed directly to Moscow. Then they even shot down several helicopters of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And this, I repeat, represents actions that simply could not go unpunished. Although initially it seemed that, as far as we knew, an agreement had been reached and a more or less negotiated exit had been arranged. Excuse the redundancy regarding that private military company. Initially, they went to Belarus, and that's why Lukashenko was also involved in this agreement. Many of them served as instructors for the Belarusian army, and many ended up returning to Africa, where they continue to work effectively as instructors for these state security forces and bodies from different African countries with which the Russian Federation has strategic agreements. Some went to Venezuela to work as instructors, mostly the more experienced Wagner members. We're not talking here about Wagner's cannon fodder. Well, yes, actually, even though they treated everyone pretty equally, including the prisoners who joined their ranks. But there was a historic group within Wagner that indeed took much better care of themselves, which obviously makes perfect sense because they were highly trained and experienced members. It would be crazy to lump everyone together and lose them all the same way. Just imagine someone from the special forces. I'm speaking in comparative terms, not just an ordinary soldier. Each one, for their specific objective, is the best suited at any given moment. So, what is the official private military company? Wagner? Have the different units been spread around the world? The vast majority of the private military company, Wagner fighters, they became part of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and of the different volunteer detachments that have indeed been created. For these purposes, the vast majority remained within the limits of the special military operation, that is, mostly in Donbass. But, well, there are also some in other territories Kharkov, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and the rest were also sent abroad. Some returned to the missions where they had already participated. The key point here is the fact that from the Russian Federation, they also operate abroad. Units have been created within the Ministry of Defense itself so that these private military company, Wagner fighters, could join them. For example, the African Corps is the one currently dedicated to the tasks being carried out within Africa. You are the ones delivering the message yourselves. You have repeated it yourselves countless times. Russia indeed does not forgive traitors. And even though many of these men, as far as we know today, were deceived by Yevgeny Prigozhin, and indeed, either they didn't know exactly where they were going or they did know, but they had been shown a different picture from what was actually going to happen. And in fact, the private military company, Wagner fighters, indeed, all of them were able to have a negotiated exit, a dignified exit. And I repeat, each one tried to find their place within the new structures that were indeed created for this purpose. Mainly within the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Some indeed did not return, meaning they left private military company Wagner and simply did not go back to the battlefield, officially at least, but the vast majority indeed preferred to sign contracts with the official organization, I repeat, with the Russian Ministry of Defense. Both those who are now abroad and those who are currently in the territory of the special military operation. I'm saying this in a rather calm way now because at one point, this hurt many of us and it left many of us, well, affected. Our feelings were mixed and we were caught off guard. At first, we didn't understand what was happening. We couldn't see how it could be solved or where to even start. But, well, now that some time has passed, sometimes indeed, personal egos can play tricks on us. And everything points to the fact that in the case of private military company Wagner, unfortunately, and much to my regret, that's exactly what happened. There were many people who felt a lot of sympathy for Yevgeny Prigozhin. He himself denied countless times that he wanted to run for any political office. There's no reason not to believe him, but the truth is that at a very delicate moment for the country, he was focused on wearing things down and, above all, let's say, rocking the boat. Much more than usual, far more than necessary. So, in a way, when ego is in charge, the endings tend to be extremely tragic. And this really hasn't been any exception. However, the private military company, Wagner fighters, for the most part, are in perfect condition and continue to carry out their combat duties. Well, whether it's logistics, combat, whatever tasks they have or had, even within the special military operation. Because this is usually the rule that's used to determine where this person or that person goes. But the private military company Wagner, as such, has now officially ceased to exist within the Russian Federation as a private military organization.